Hello and welcome to the newest edition of Pro Pharma Talks. My name is Alex Hernandez. Alongside me, as always, is Dr. Craig Stern, and Em just opened up a can. So, thank you, Em. You threw me off my whole game. Well, anyways, our topic for today is artificial intelligence. See, I'm off my game already. The topic for today is artificial intelligence, and it's how it's used in healthcare. And when Dr. Stern first came to me and said we should talk about artificial intelligence in healthcare, and I'm like, robots, of course. Of course we're going to talk about robots. But he said otherwise. So what is it that you meant exactly when you wanted to broach this topic?
Yeah, that's a good point. You're back on your game.
I'm back. I'm back in.
Okay, here's the deal. Artificial in the past, and to a point now, technology, engineering companies, manufacturing companies have been way ahead of everything going on in healthcare with regard to technology. Technology is finally catching up, not because doctors, not because pharmacists, not because nurses, but because Silicon Valley and the rest of technology has been introducing this kind of work into healthcare. Healthcare desperately needs it, wants it, and uses it. So as a disclaimer to everybody, Pro Pharma and Pro Data Analytics, we live in this world. We are data analysts. Yes, we use artificial intelligence. Alex, when he's not being a class clown, also deals with it, etc. So understand that we live in this world. Now, artificial intelligence, in a very simplistic way, is to use machines, to use computers, to use computer code to do things that normally people would do.
Right.
So effectively,
the tedious stuff.
Tedious stuff. Right. Yeah, we're not talking about painting the Mona Lisa. We're talking about issues where there's tedious, repetitive kind of things that are done.
You know, a lot like how you move from the slide rule to the calculator, right?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes. He's pushing on the fact that I was a physicist and I showed him a slide rule once before.
That's a very ancient artifact.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, before that, we went into space on a slide rule.
That's true.
Bottom line here is this. In hospitals and in areas where logistics and the need to be able to supply services is necessary, certain robotics is important. But what's at the base of that? The base of it is computer code, and while none of my staff wants to hear about it, there are algorithms, and algorithms are nothing more than rules, where the rule says take one of this and add these two together and come up with a solution.
Right.
It's the same thing whether it's a robot, whether it's a computer program or otherwise. We are not going to spend any time talking about robotics, even though my staff wants to focus entirely on robotics.
We're just saying don't leave it out.
There's a lot of work in that, and it's terribly important and terribly crucial to what's going on in healthcare today, none the least of which is that there are robots that are doing surgery. But what we want to talk about is analytics in this particular case, where you're taking data and you're looking at data in order to answer fundamental questions. There are probably an infinite number of questions that can be asked, but questions such as how many people went into the hospital that did not get their insulin, for example, and had high metrics to say that their diabetes was not in control. It's questions like that, and many, many other questions that you use in order to try and map out what's going on, to identify what's happening so that you can develop a strategy to fix it, and standard monitoring so that you can look for these kind of problems and then effectively fix them before they happen so that you can keep the process going. That's what we want to talk about. That's artificial intelligence. That's analytics.
So you're talking about, in the simplest form, maybe ways for doctors to follow up, ways for doctors to keep in contact with their patient for compliance, because we know there are certain doctors in our country or even in this region that see hundreds of patients in a week, or maybe 50 in a day, or some crazy number that we couldn't even think of, as far as how do they keep up with these patients? How do they make sure their patients are complying? How do they build that relationship with these patients? And we can use AI to help bring those relationships closer together.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely correct with regard to some of the things that are used for artificial intelligence with doctors, but pharmacists are also using it. Right. Nurses are using it. Hospitals are using it. Insurance companies are using it. So across the line, effectively everybody is using it, one, to be more efficient in management, two, so that they can identify those areas that they can predict to be a problem to fix it. So for example, and only as an example, suppose that you're in pharmacy and you want to be able to counsel people who are not complying with their medication.
Right.
Artificial intelligence and the way that you handle it, in some cases that aren't even artificial intelligence, it's just smart programming of what goes on, deals with this and says, these are the people that seem to have a problem with compliance. Therefore, of all the people that you see that maybe drugs are dispensed to, it's this subset of people that you need to talk to about how to comply with their drugs. Nurses similarly have to deal with being able to manage multiple patients at one time, looking for indicators that says that if people have these particular indicators, whether it's age, gender, length of time in the hospital, the kind of diagnoses they have, the kind of procedures they have, the kind of IVs they have, kind of allergies they have, all of these things, to be able to group them and deal with it in a reasonable way with rules to say, these people can have a problem, therefore we're going to watch them more carefully, and secondly, we're going to be able to identify or even to try and fix the problem before it occurs, so we don't have drug-induced disease, so we don't have issues with regard to hospital-acquired infections, etc. All healthcare providers, all payers, all people who are involved in it, whether they're evaluating, whether they're doing direct patient care, whether they're managing it or otherwise, are using this data and using the rules of the data in order to develop what in technology is known as algorithms, what we can think of as rules to say, if you're diabetic, if you're not on insulin, if you have particular laboratory metrics, and if any of them are high, then what do you do about it, and how do you focus on them in order to get them in control so that they can lead a normal life and that they can have normal conditions.
And then just not to overcomplicate things, because that's what I do best. You're saying it in its most simplistic form. Like you say, you go to the hospital, you see a nurse, but there are people that go to a hospital, see a nurse. They go to a different clinic, they see another doctor, or they go to another place. This is where artificial intelligence, in my opinion, comes in handy the most. When you're able to gather all the results from every location that this patient went to. I mean, granted, we're not exactly there yet, but there is a system in place that would allow that to happen, right?
Actually, that's a very good point. Yeah. I'm surprised. That's a very good point, Alex.
Don't act surprised. You're
surprised. The coordination of care is a huge problem.
Right.
People are involved with multiple locations of service. Healthcare historically has been in a silo. Hospitals have their information but don't share it. Doctors have their information when people come to see them, they don't share it. Pharmacies have their information when people come to get a drug dispensed, they don't share it.
Even worse, so historically,
psychiatrists have a similar thing, and there is a Chinese wall, if you will, between psychiatry and physical medicine, where people cannot, under some circumstances, share information. But bottom line is, the old silo method is now being transformed because literally everybody has a phone. That information can carry their basic medical information. So if that person ends up in the emergency room, somebody can know what kind of drugs are you on, what diagnoses have you had, maybe even results of x-rays or laboratories, etc., so that the doctor isn't starting from scratch trying to figure out what to do.
He's well
that can
aware of
deal
your
with it.
medical history.
He can.
Yeah.
And in that regard, the patient, whether they have a phone or whether it's on a central system, like in large health systems, etc., this allows everybody to know what everybody else has done. Not necessarily to look over their shoulder, although management does do that, but clearly to say this patient was at home, they were in the hospital, they went to a skilled nursing facility, they went to a clinic after, etc. That information follows them so that now you can be more efficient. In the past, we would have to go look and everybody would have to start from the beginning. When I was asked on a consult, I'd have to start from the beginning of whatever information was available to me. But in a hospital, for example, I didn't know a lot about what was going on in the outpatient community. I didn't know if they had been in other hospitals. I didn't know if they had been in skilled nursing. You could ask the question, but frequently the patient was either a good historian, and even if they were a good historian, they couldn't tell you everything about what had happened because there was one element you were looking for, but you didn't know whether they knew so that they could tell you. So you're absolutely right, Alex. This whole issue of multiple locations of service, accumulating all of this data, and then being able to add these artificial intelligence rule sets, add predictions, add statistics, which I understand a lot of people don't like, but at the end of the day, it's used because you're trying to find the people that have the greatest risk of a problem. For example, and only as an example, suppose you have a population of men. You're trying to determine which of those men have the highest risk of prostate cancer. There are indicators that you can use because you're looking for this and this and this and this, and you take those indicators, you set up the rules so that you go look for those people. They may not have it now, good, but at least you can monitor them and try and deal with it early before it becomes a serious problem and the cancer is metastasized, and now you have a much larger issue than what you started with.
Basically, all men. Basically. But one of the things I also wanted to mention was you know how this silo idea is actually, it's like it basically being broken down and being turned into a cloud, if you want to look at it that way. Because insurance companies, your healthcare insurance companies, typically they get all the information from your doctor because they want to get submitted because that's how they get paid, right? So you could essentially just have everything linked up, like with their iPhone. You can put in your healthcare insurance or your health insurance number, and all your history is in there.
Yes.
But there is also, when you pay cash, insurance companies don't know what just happened.
That's correct.
So that's another issue that we need to find a way to get artificial intelligence involved in that.
Well, what is also interesting in that is the following. You're talking about data where someone has paid someone. So there's financial data to say, I saw a doctor, I paid for it, and here's all the information that supports that payment. Similarly with a hospital or skilled nursing or anyone else. That's one set of data. It's not all the data. There is now data from the electronic healthcare or medical records where the doctors entered all the information based on the visit, where they're putting that data in, because in the financial data, you don't have, for example, the patient has high blood pressure, but you don't know what the blood pressure is. Or they have diabetes, but you don't know what their blood sugar is, or their diabetes A1C, or the history of their blood sugars, or anything like that. So presumably in the electronic medical record, you can add a lot of that information. So you're getting a second set of clinical information to add to the financial information. And then when you talk to patients, you want to get a larger review of them and what they're like. Not just do they smoke, or do they have are they sedentary, or do they move around and they exercise? Are they active? But you also want to know other things that may influence what goes on. So in that regard, there is biometric information that is now becoming more available to add into this, so that you can add what they're doing. Yes, all the what's on the watch, etc., to deal with it, so that you've got not just financial information and all the stuff that is supported, the clinical information from the electronic medical record and other areas, information with regard to the biometric, to deal with they smoke, okay, there's certain laboratory issues in order to tell how much they smoke or what it is, and a host of other issues about, are they watching their diet, what kind of a diet do they have, what is their general feeling, and how do they look on life, and how do they deal with it, etc. So we're not just
inputting the Skittles that you eat during the day is detrimental.
You got to do something about that.
You got to put that in there.
Yeah. So,
not speaking personally.
No, of course not. So you're bringing in all of this data now, and the artificial intelligence then allows us to look, once again, very simplistically, to look at blood pressure and your visit to the doctor, and what was the blood pressure at that time, and issues with regard to the hospital, and what was it at that time, and what kind of medications are you on, and what kind of x-rays did you have. Women obviously have a huge prevalence with regard to breast cancer. How do we deal with that so that we can limit or minimize the risk of people, whether it's high risk or low risk or otherwise, with that? Some of it is statistical modeling that is part of all of this artificial intelligence. Part of it is setting up the rules, looking for hospital admissions, emergency room admissions, length of stay, drugs that they're on, etc., 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 in order to try and come up with reasonable ways to make things more efficient. People, an individual doctor, cannot remember or use all the potential diagnoses that are out there. No one, pharmacist or doctor, can remember all the drugs that are out there, all the doses, all the adverse effects, all the everything that's out there. So clearly they have to reference these things. And now what we're trying to do is to make sure that all of that information is available. So on one level, it makes a doctor more effective, it makes a pharmacist more effective, a nurse more effective, and at the same time, it takes all healthcare and gives that information so that the person has a greater chance in order to deal with it. Clearly, there are privacy issues and people are concerned, but fundamental in the world of healthcare, there is the issue of treatment and how it's dealt with, and that has to be open to everybody. Information with regard to payment has to be made available to everybody so it can be paid for. Issues with regard to administration, so that people can use a lot of this artificial intelligence, not at the point of patient care, but before that, in order to look for trends, in order to give more information to people to make them more efficient healthcare individuals. That's artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and it's crazy when you think about it, because you got regular people who don't realize how much artificial intelligence is impacting not only their lives but healthcare.
Yes.
Because I mean, you could see, everyone talks about it. Society is buried deep into their phones, and everything is a smartphone now. Everything has an app. Everything has information in it. It has all your information already.
Yeah.
But in healthcare, sharing that information is actually crucial to actually your quality of life. When you really think about it, if you're dependent on medication, you even more so need artificial intelligence to get involved. As for
and even you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And even if, just to kind of round the circle, and not trying to take a political position, but we have patients who have money to pay for things. We have people who are getting insurance through their employers, and many of these healthcare systems are very good, and people don't pay a large copay, so they're happy with that. And then people who are disadvantaged or poor, even immigrants, and even with all the things going on today with immigration, you still have these people coming in. In some cases, they're overloading the system. In other cases, they need to be cared for, and they're coming in with complications. because nobody had a history of what's going on.
Exactly.
And so, while you can't know everything because someone came from another country or they came from somewhere where the healthcare wasn't available, or maybe certain kinds of care wasn't available,
Right.
you can certainly deal with it where you can keep that information together and try and limit the amount of impact, make their lives more simple by dealing with it, because you get all this information, try and coordinate it and help them. And if they bring in particular diseases or have endemic particular diseases, that you have a way to be able to monitor for that and treat for that. And in other cases, the people that have insurance can learn from those that don't, and those that don't can learn from the people that do, because you already have systems in place for the people that have insurance to see what needs to be done in order to protect these people, whether they're immigrants, poor, or otherwise. And the immigrants bring in particular problems that we didn't have that. And so now what's the difference? What's the delta difference, and how do you go about fixing that?
Right.
It's a major issue, and these kind of things impact healthcare regardless. And healthcare has to deal with it because there's no fake news in healthcare. You either have it, or you have truth and you treat people with truth, or you are treating them for something that doesn't exist, and that is pure nonsense to what goes on.
Right.
There's no such thing as lying to people in healthcare. Clearly you can't tell people, some people who don't want to know what their diagnosis is and the rest, but that's not the answer. You're trying to make sure that they have whatever is the best thing that can be done for them to give them the optimum benefit at a minimum acceptable risk, because everything has risk,
Right.
and to find some way to give them at an affordable cost. That's what has to happen.
Yeah. Healthcare is science, basically, at its core.
It is.
It's you make a decision, and there's evidence to support the decision.
Yeah, and there's still some art to medicine, obviously. Certainly you see it more in dermatology than you see it perhaps in some other areas. But at the end of the day, more and more of what's going on today is moving exactly as you're saying, to more science, more prediction, more work on what goes on. And this can only help patients. It can only help cost and what insurers are doing. It can only help providers in order to be more informed about what goes on.
Right.
It can only help pharmacy to be able to deliver the best drugs and to be able to monitor those drugs and deal with it. And of course, nursing, in order to make sure that they're providing the information. But if you take one piece of information out, then you only know this much about what goes on. It's like a stream. You take a rock and you drop it in, then the ripples go everywhere. Well, if you try and limit it, the ripples don't go everywhere, but you only know what's going on here. You don't know what else is going on everywhere.
Exactly. And also, you can use artificial intelligence for the patient's sake to find the cheapest drug out there in the region.
You can.
And that
We do that. I mean,
I do that all the time.
yes, you do.
And the website is free. It's called goodrx.com. It's a really good website.
And also on RxInfo X, where we're telling everybody where the cost is, and you can go there and find out.
Yeah. So just to kind of put a button on this, really quick, artificial intelligence is used in healthcare. We use it all over healthcare. What are some of the things we should be looking forward to in healthcare as far as artificial intelligence?
Well, I think that the main thing is that technology is pushing us to deal with a greater understanding. And now healthcare, as groups, as we train everybody, physicians, pharmacists, nurses, healthcare economists, issues with regard to managers,
and
etc.
finally, doctors who had no idea a slide rule exists. Go ahead, continue.
You won't get off this slide rule thing. The most important thing is that people become informed. They're educated, certainly within the healthcare community. They're informed in the patient population so that they can ask for these things. The medical community knows about it, can make use of it, can ask for, demand for more technology in order to help with what goes on. And it becomes more of a collaboration than what it has been so far, where it's we can do this and, oh, that's neat, I can use that, to more of a collaboration. We need more of this, build this, will include the information and expand what goes on.
And doctors walking around with tablets and pinpointing everything and getting all the information.
They do, and pharmacists now have technology on their machines in order to know the history of what goes on and what the adverse drug effects are and potential information about that. But people need to talk together, work together in teams, because at the end of the day, the doctor doesn't know everything, the pharmacist doesn't know everything, the nurse doesn't know everything, insurance company only knows what they know from what was paid, et cetera, et cetera. Now we have to bring them together so that everybody can work together.
We put them all together into one big robot. That's where we were going with this.
Just won't get the robots.
You hear that, Em? Robots are coming. Okay, that's it. That's all for today. Any last words? No, we're good.
No.
We're good.
We had to have robots in this, didn't we?
Robots have to be in there, and robot doctors, robot pharmacists, and then a human in the back, just to make sure the robot doesn't get out of line. Just in case we need to pull the plug. So that's it for our discussion today. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to send them down below or message us. I believe Ann will put up an email for us to put. Right? She'll put an email there for you. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us. Also visit propharmaconsultants.com. We have a free information page called RxInfoX. Also on there is a ticker that has drug prices there, and also below that is the most recent news articles that have come up throughout the day and week and from various different sources. And anything else am I missing?
No, that'll do it.
No. Also visit Pharmacy Benefit News. You can get articles written by Dr. Stern himself. And that's it for today. We'll see you next week.